All right, welcome along to the RT Soccer World Cup podcast. Diallo here, and tonight I'm joined by RT Sport Online's Peter Branigan and also former UCD Shamrock Rovers and Sheffield Wednesday midfielder Paul Corry. And I forgot there, Peter, to mention that the UCD connection does spread beyond Paul and actually to you as well. I'm kind of outnumbered on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't need to remind you that any of the third levels you went to aren't in the Premier Division of the SSE or Tristy League, Raf, as well. So it's a double defeat, I'm afraid.
Yeah, former Trinity and DCU guilty as charged here. But anyway, I think anyone who does listen to this podcast knows the theme, and I don't need to repeat it. We are recording during the evening game, which is the last 16 encounter between Portugal and Switzerland. And it's reading Portugal 5, Switzerland 1, and Cristiano Ronaldo has just come on. So, Paul, I mean, that was the big take before the game, and then it's weirdly enough the fella who replaces him, Gonzalo Ramos, young striker, bags a hat-trick for himself.
Yeah, Ramos has been superb, Raf, over the course of the 73 minutes that we've seen so far. If you look at the goals that he scored, they're all probably a little different in nature as well. The first is just outrageous. He's got absolutely no right to hit it from where he was. He had kind of Fabian Schär in close quarters, and he's just rifled it past the keeper. It was a superb strike. And then the second one was a lovely darting run to the front post. Great ball in from Diallo and a neat little finish. And the third one is one where he's run onto it and a lovely dink over the keeper again. So his game in general, I thought his hold of play was strong. He's a threat in behind. He caused the Swiss back three in the first half endless amount of problems, and his general play has been superb. So from a Fernando Santos point of view, I mean, he's fully justified in the decision that he's made. Whether or not it was disciplinary with Ronaldo, whether or not it was a dip in performances, it remains to be seen. But it would look as if it has been the right move, and I just thought it freed up the others as well. When you look at Felix, Bernardo Silva and Fernandes, they seem to be playing almost with their chest out. They seem like there's more freedom without Ronaldo out there. So it's very hard to see how it's going to change from here on in. But Portugal have been superb. Like Brazil put down a benchmark last night, and Portugal, have gone close at, if not above it.
Yeah, and Peter, I guess when Ronaldo was dropped, it if we were talking 4 years ago, there would be major ructions. It'd be a huge shock. It only came as a very slight surprise, at least to me. I don't know how you felt when you saw that news.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't particularly surprised. I thought he was okay in the first game that they played in the tournament, and he got the penalty, and he looked decent. But yeah, like as you say, he's not the player that he once was. So I mean, at this stage, Ronaldo not playing is not as big a deal as it might otherwise have been. I mean, it's a World Cup last 16 games, so they're hardly so confident that they were going to go through, even though they're so far ahead that they could, rest him or give him a bit of time off or whatever. So yeah, like the ends justify the means. I remember years ago, Brian O'Driscoll missing out on a Lions test, and the Lions went on and won the game, and the manager's job is to win the game, and they've won the game well. So yeah, right decision, I suppose, at this stage.
Yeah, and Paul, I guess, I think just at 75 minutes here, he's standing over a free kick, which probably means, based on his track record, he's not going to score. But but overall, you mentioned, players kind of having their chest puffed out. I mean, the players that actually did start, and there seemed to be that freedom in attack. How different do you think it would have been had Ronaldo started in terms of the lack of freedom and movement that they might have had?
I think naturally enough, like when you look at Portugal, when you look at Argentina, the players around the Messi or Ronaldo superstar are always looking to give the ball to Ronaldo. I think that's naturally enough. Their first thought or their first instinct is to look for Ronaldo and maybe go against what is their natural creative flair. And I thought it looked, anyway, for me, with João Felix in particular, looked like the shackles were off. I've always thought Bruno Fernandes, particularly Manchester United, is better when Ronaldo's not in the team. And I just thought that they looked a more fluid outfit going forward, and Ramos offered them something different in the way that he moved the three centre-halves from Switzerland around. And as an attacking threat, they looked far more threatening without Ronaldo in the team. I mean, Ronaldo's always been an individual player, Raf. It's always been about him. You would have put up with it for the last 10 years because his individual contributions have been so strong, and his return in front of goal has been fantastic. But with the leg slowing down, the change probably had to come about. And when you see how well Ramos has done. When you see like Felix for the first 60 minutes, I thought was out of this world. I'm a massive fan of him. It's never really happened from Atletico Madrid, but he oozes talent, as does Fernandes. So those players, I think without Ronaldo on the team, probably play more as a unit, and they look far more threatening going forward. And be very hard to see how Santos goes back to Ronaldo at kind of the top of the tree for them in the next round. He'd be a great asset off the bench, but he certainly ain't going to start the next game.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about Switzerland very shortly, but obviously earlier on, Morocco booked their place in the quarterfinals, so only the fourth African team to do that, and they're going to be facing Portugal unless there is a comeback of epic proportions here, which obviously, look, I can't read the future, but I'm just going to say it, that's not going to happen. But Ronaldo's height against a sort of packed defence as we saw against that the Moroccans had against the Spanish, do you think there is a possibility that he would be brought in just because of his aerial ability, or given what Ramos has done and he's been outstanding, a hat-trick, you can't really ask for more, that it would be foolish and very unlikely that Fernando Santos would go to Ronaldo as a starter?
Yeah, I think it's very unlikely. Just looking at the two sides and how they've played, the Portuguese and the Spanish, I think the Portuguese will probably move the Moroccans around a bit better than the Spanish would have. And I think with Ramos in particular, like Spain started with Morata up top tonight, who's not a natural out and out number 9 and probably likes to drop into midfield and become involved in the play. Ramos seems more than happy to lead the line and be that kind of 6-yard box man. He showed that with his second goal tonight. So I wouldn't have any concerns about playing him in that role. I think he's kind of got that youthful style of play to his game at the moment where he kind of doesn't fear anything. So I think he'd be more than happy to go in there, and whether it's a ball from out wide or kind of an intricate ball through the middle of the pitch, I think he's more than capable of scoring different types of goals. So I don't see any concerns there. I think Portugal are certainly more fluid than Spain were today. And if they can kind of replicate this performance, you also have to take into consideration, I don't think the Moroccans will be able to replicate what they produced today, given how long they went without the ball for such a sustained period of time. So I don't think Portugal have many problems. And if one thing has come about tonight, I'd say Ramos's valuation has probably gone up about 20, 30, 40 million off the back of that performance.
Yeah, and obviously as it stands 5-1, there's another, we've talked a lot about Portugal here, but there is another side to the story, of course, Peter, which is Switzerland. I think with Ronaldo in the team, potentially, had he started, and also just given how strong Switzerland have been, I think they've been called the best Swiss team ever by their manager. One would have expected this would have been a really tight game given the experience they have, but it's massively disappointing, especially given the scoreline.
Yeah, they just looked off from the very start. That's the thing. It's like one of those games where they fell behind quickly, and then very quickly they were getting annoyed. You could see they were getting frustrated on the pitch, and yeah, once that tends to happen, you kind of feel like it's going to go away from them. And there was a couple of chances they had in the first half where if they got a goal back at 2-0, they could have made it interesting. But yeah, once it gets to 3 and 4, like the game is a done deal. But yeah, they look decent. They gave Brazil a bit of a test in the group stage as well. I think we were all expecting a bit more from them tonight, and yeah, I don't know. They didn't really produce it, which would always be a disappointment for them. Although I know we've played them, Ireland have played them a few times and never tended to do well. So yeah, I don't know. It's a complete kind of off day, just judging by the part of the game that I saw anyway.
Yeah, especially considering they got to the quarterfinals of the last Euros with what was actually an epic comeback against France. But Paul, I wonder from their point of view, and it's hard to say because we're not in their dressing room, but the whole Ronaldo factor, maybe they would have prepared to face him, and then obviously it's a different attack that they've come up against today. Do you think that might be a factor potentially in there, especially defensively?
It certainly looked in the first half that it caught them by surprise, because Akanji, Schär and Rodriguez got run ragged. They just weren't able to deal with the movement that was in front of them. And I think they probably would have been happier, particularly Fabi and Schär would have been happier to play against Ronaldo, who's not as quick and unlikely to run you in behind. So yeah, maybe they set up against a Portuguese team that thought the play was going to be in front of them a bit more, but the runners in behind absolutely killed them. They got moved around terribly in the first half, and gaps appeared from everywhere, and they never really covered from there. So maybe it was a case that they were preparing for Ronaldo, but even if they were, you would have expected a bit of a better performance. I've never really been gone on the Swiss. I think they always do well to qualify for competitions, and they seem to one way or another get out of a group. But it tends to come to quite a halt once that happens. They've never really gone deep in competition. So it's disappointing because, they've good players in that squad, the likes of Xhaka, Shar and Bolo, Shaqiri. You would have thought with the age profile of some of those players that this would have been a really good opportunity for them. And I wouldn't say I fancied them, but I thought they were going to give them a bit of a run tonight. They never really got out of the blocks, Rafa, and Portugal blew them away within the first half an hour of the game.
Yeah, it's a contrasting defence to how Morocco set up against, albeit they do play a similar formation, but it's a very different setup in terms of Morocco and the way they defended against Spain and the way they've defended throughout the tournament. So first, from a Morocco point of view, Bono, and this is probably the time where I have to go for the puns and everything else. I think beautiful day. It's a beautiful day for Morocco. I'll stop it there. There's many other options I have written down, but I'm not gonna go there. Too many people have done that already. But first off, his performance. I mean, we've seen him for Sevilla over a number of years, Paul. But 2 penalty saves. The other one from Sarabia hitting the post during the shootout. He's definitely the hero for them today.
Yeah, you live off that for a while now. Like the one thing was this: the Spanish penalties were absolutely desperate. I didn't think any of them were hit with any sort of conviction, and none of them really kind of inspired you when they were going up to take the penalties. But the saves were superb. It was similar to kind of Croatia yesterday. He's gone the right way and he's have to save them. But I think you're right in saying, Raf, like his general play within the 120 minutes was very strong as well. That kind of spine of the team with himself, Saiss and Amrabat they were excellent. Like they put their body in front of absolutely everything, the way they organised. To go that long in a game without seeing a huge amount of the ball requires so much discipline, requires so much concentration, and it just takes one lapse against the Spanish team and you get carved open. So to see it out for that period of time and to get them to a penalty shootout in the first place was a good achievement. But then the way he produced the saves, like he went the right way. He seemed to psych the players out and he's produced. So he deserves a huge kind of clap on the back, and that goes for the back four and the midfield as well, because that was a huge shift they put in.
Yeah, Ronaldo just had a goal ruled out for offside there, Peter, as well. Well, he was well offside, and obviously he wasn't celebrating either because I think he knew it straight away.
Yeah, well, like I suppose, as Paul said earlier on, he's a handy player now to be able to bring on off the bench if they need to in a game. Like he can still produce. He's such a good header of the ball. We know that all too well from the qualifiers. So, I mean, like there's still obviously plenty about him. It's just, as I say, I think tonight justifies the selection. But in terms of Morocco this afternoon, I mean, I was very impressed that the fact that I think there was, there's this way of counting possession now. Like Spain had 63 or 64%. Morocco only had 23% possession in that game, and yet the rest was kind of in play or in context or in contest even. But Morocco was just had a game plan and frustrated Spain, and were decent on the break. Bafal in the first half was really good, and he kind of came off after like 65 minutes. I wasn't entirely sure what to think and whether he was tired or whatever. But yeah, he impressed, and yeah, the thing is, the longer you go into a game like that, the more you can frustrate your opponents. But like Portugal tonight got such a quick start, that's exactly what they'll be trying to do on Saturday. And the fact that they're so far ahead in this game, Morocco have to bring so much to a game that takes place at 3:00 on Saturday afternoon. It's a big turnaround after the emotional release of first quarter final, and yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how they deal with this. And you mentioned Saiss, the defender who played really well. Towards the end, he cleared a ball and then he had to get taped up, and then he came back on and he wasn't really walking too well. So again, a quick turnaround 4 days to try and get that injury sorted if there is an issue there. Yeah,
from Spain's point of view, Paul, I mean, this the forward trio that they played was the exact same one that would have started in the 7-0 win over Costa Rica in their opening game. Obviously Costa Rica set up in a very, very different way, but was it the lack of a focal point you feel maybe, or at least for until Alvaro Morata came on later on, was that the main issue for them? Or is it just the way they, you've mentioned how Portugal maybe will give Morocco a different test because they'll move them around a little bit, but what's the issue with Spain today that you felt stopped them picking their way through?
I think when you play in that style, it's very important that you move the ball quickly and you move the opposition about and you play with a conviction. And I think conviction was really lacking in the final third today. They Spain naturally enough will look to pass you to death, and they'll keep the ball and they'll move you around and they'll wait for the right moment to carve you open. But at times when you're watching Spain, you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and you're just thinking, somebody please just have a strike or produce something, a moment of magic from out wide and cross the ball and somebody get on the end of it. And they didn't do that too often. Like the chance at the end with Sarabia was maybe one opportunity or one moment when they managed to time it well, they managed to execute it, and only the post kept them out. But you can't say that happened too many times, Raf, with over the course of 120 minutes. And you do expect a hell of a lot more from Spain. Their football is brilliant. I enjoy watching it. But if they don't get an early goal, or if they kind of get frustrated, they do tend to kind of lose a bit of conviction or a bit of intensity in their play. And I thought that suffered today. And to be fair to Morocco, they dug in, and it felt like a home game with a number of Moroccans in there. And that, I'm sure, got them over the line. But from a Spanish point of view, with that much possession, I would have been expecting them to carve out more clear-cut chances. And yes, I think the absence of a number 9 is very evident within that Spanish team. Morata doesn't quite do it for me. He never really did it for me when he was at Chelsea either. And if you're looking at where they are as a team and as a group, they've got incredibly gifted young players, but they do need to find that kind of David Villa, Fernando Torres, who's going to play and lead the line and score goals in important matches. And that's essentially what's been their Achilles heel today.
Yeah, and that means it is another World Cup since they won it in 2010. It's been a group stage exit, last 16, so they haven't been to a quarter final since then. It's almost going back to the way Spanish teams would have been at World Cups in previous eras, where they were always the type of team that tended to qualify very well and then perennially disappointed. But we were speaking to Ray Houghton on the podcast earlier in the week, Paul, and in regards to Pedri and Gavi, he wasn't really buying the hype. He's not as impressed as maybe other people are. What's your take on them? They're still very young, but they are obviously highly regarded.
Yeah, they're highly regarded. I can understand people who might not criticize Gavi or Pedri, but have question marks, because they'll say players who play in that position either need to be creating chances or scoring goals. And a lot of the time, maybe they are more about keeping the ball and moving the ball and possession based without really having that kind of killer instinct in the final third. And that's maybe an area of their game that you could start looking at from a statistics point of view. People seem to be obsessed with that now, assists and goals. Are they having the real impact in the final third? And that's probably not a question mark, but an area that they need to develop. I mean, they're so young, Raf. It is very hard to be critical. So much is expected of them to lead a Barcelona team and then lead Spain on a national point of view. So I really like them. I think they're fantastic technicians. I think if you put better players, like if you put the Portuguese front three ahead of them in that Spanish team, I think you would be looking at Gavi and Pedri and saying, wow, they link the play so well and they supply that front three so well. I don't think they have the players in Spain. Like, I don't think Almo, Torres or Asensio have that killer instinct that the Portuguese do. There's so much more to come from them. I think they will be they'll be in that Spanish midfield for the next 10 years. And I think they'll go on and they'll win a competition at some point. I do get the question marks for now, but for me, I think they're superb players. I love watching them, and they're real, world-class technicians.
Yeah, most certainly. And we'll just have to see if Luis Enrique remains in charge. His record is pretty decent. I mean, he took them to the semi-finals of the last European Championships. He's actually been doing something very interesting in this World Cup as well, which is streaming on a platform called Twitch to some of the Spanish fans. And I've checked out a little bit of it. The way he speaks Spanish, I can actually sort of understand it. So it has been okay. But in regards to Morocco, Peter, I mean, is there a danger, with certain teams when they cause a surprise, getting to a quarterfinal is a huge achievement, but is there a danger they get some vertigo when they get to the quarters? And I think that is a UCD, or not a UCD reference, a Bono and U2 reference there. I apologize.
It was one of them. Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, the next game, it's really difficult to come down. And as I was saying earlier on, I think if you frustrate Portugal and you hold them and you get to kind of half time, then you can begin to believe and build. But I mean, you could very easily see, because of how much they put into that game, what happened to South Korea like last night, get opened up early and be in big trouble, or what's happened to Switzerland in this game. And that would be the disappointing part. One comment I would make on that game today was the referee, Fernando Raffaellini. I thought he let a lot go, which I have to say I kind of enjoyed. I think the players very quickly realised, okay, if you go down easily here, you are not necessarily going to get a free. I think Brian Cody might have liked him as a referee in a Munster Hurling Championship game, because he was just like, let the game flow and, you know, no diving. And yeah, I really enjoyed that element of it. And it was kind of like refreshing, just players going down all over the place and free kicks weren't necessarily being given. And players take those cues from the referee. And I think the players did today, and it made for, well, towards the end of the second half, the game was starting to maybe wear a bit thin, but in the first hour of the game was very enjoyable, I thought, for that reason.
I think the refereeing as a whole has been very good. I think, you know, they've let the game flow probably a little more. And, you know, you can have the question marks about VAR, but I think in general, the refereeing has been of a good standard.
Yeah. I've just seen a 6th goal going in there. So much was made previously about Messi not scoring in the knockout stages World Cup. He's got that out of the way. Ronaldo's still waiting for a World Cup knockout stage goal. However, Paul, I think I did see, I think it was your reaction I was looking at there. Rafael Leao's his 2nd goal of the tournament and 2nd overall for Portugal. What a finish.
I would have expected him to start tonight, Rafa, ahead of Ramos, simply because I wouldn't have known too much about Ramos coming into tonight's game. And what I have seen of Leao, he's been pretty good when he's played for AC Milan. I mean, that's a superb goal. He's come down the left, he's chopped in, and maybe questionable from Jan Sommer in the Swiss goal, but a superb finish. And he's another one, like, they've so many options in that final third of different players that they can go for. And you know, if they do need to change it up or bring on a couple of different weapons, if you've got Ronaldo and Leao on the bench, they're certainly 2 good ones to go to. I think the Moroccans will be absolutely flaked come the quarterfinal. I think the Portuguese will win easy against Morocco. I just can't wait to watch this back next week and see Morocco go 2-0. But that's the way I see it panning out right now.
Yeah, and we'll just as this is coming right to the very end now, they're going to blow the final whistle very, very shortly. It's going to be Portugal 6, Switzerland 1. But as I wait for that, those few seconds, the quarterfinals start on Friday. They're all going to be live on RT2 and the RT Player. And final whistle has blown there. So yeah, it is 6-1, and it's going to be Morocco versus Portugal. But the other quarterfinals, Peter, the first one is obviously going to be Brazil and Croatia, 3:00, RT2, RT Player. But where do you stand on the whole dancing celebration thing? Because even the Brazilian manager yesterday seemed to be getting in on it. It didn't look that fluid when he was taking part in it. But I know there's diverging opinions on that particular issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see the issue at all, to be honest. Robbie Keane and his famous celebration, his cartwheels, was always one of the great things when I was younger, watching Ireland teams go to the World Cups. Gary Breen's iconic celebration where he didn't know what to do. That's another way of celebrating a goal, the goal he got against Saudi in that World Cup. But yeah, I don't see what the issue is. And in fairness, I think Didi Hamann has maybe rolled back tonight. That's the latest I heard. He suggested that he will do the dance if Brazil go to the World Cup final and win it. He will do the dance in the RT studios in Montrose. So I look forward to that, because I think there's a decent chance Brazil might go and do very well in this competition for the next 3 games. So yeah, don't see what the issue is. I like, particularly when you're playing as well as you are, you're enjoying yourself and you're winning the game as well. I know, like, you know, letting out a little secret here, we're supposed to find opposing views when we're looking at these games, but like that's a tricky point to come up with to criticize the dancing. It's not the worst I've seen, certainly not.
No, certainly not. And yeah, but the more important thing, obviously, they probably will. I think they had said one Brazilian player in particular had said prior to the tournament they had practiced 10 different dancing celebrations, Paul, and that's not going to look too good if they get shocked by Croatia, though. But does it look like in that game between Brazil and Croatia that it very much is, you know, it's obviously Brazil's to lose, but the way they played against South Korea, granted, South Korea didn't put up much resistance, but Brazil are going to be heavy favourites, and for the whole tournament, but also especially against a Croatia team that lack pace.
Yeah, for Croatia, it's all about whether or not they can get a handle in the middle of the park with Modric, Kovacic and Brozovic and try control proceedings a bit better than they did against the Japanese, because they probably didn't show the form that they had in the group stage, but everything is pointing towards a Brazil win. And I mean, yes, we can talk all day about the attacking threats that Brazil have, but for me, it's the goalkeeper, it's Thiago Silva and it's Marquinhos. I think that is better than any kind of trio that any of the other teams have. And I think it's that foundation that then enables them to go forward with Casemiro protecting in front. So I don't see the Croatian scoring in that game. I I don't think they're good enough going forward. The front line has always kind of been their own Achilles heel. Mandzukic got them so far in previous competitions. Now you're looking at Vlasic or Perisic, whoever plays kind of in those forward positions, and they don't really seem like the type who can really hurt Brazil. And if you're not going to do that, well, then you're always going to be struggling, because the forward players that they have are so good going forward. And I think Neymar coming back and being fit gives them an extra gear as well. I think his confidence kind of rubs off on the other players, and they play with such a freedom and such creativity that they have so much capability of opening teams up. And they showed it last night. Croatia, I'm not sure it's in their nature to really sit in and defend, so I think they'll leave gaps. And I think with the form that the likes of Richarlison, Paqueta, Neymar, Vinicius Jr. in, I just think they're going to score goals, and once they do that, they're going to be a tough nut to crack with the players that I mentioned at the back.
Yeah, and then the Netherlands against Argentina, 7:00 on Friday night. How are you calling this one? Obviously, there's Van Dijk has been saying about Argentina that he does recognise they're not a one-man team in regards to Lionel Messi, obviously. But when you look at the way neither of these two have really impressed on their way to the quarterfinals, but only one of them has what one would call one of the greatest players of all time. So which way are you tipping the scales?
I hope with Argentina, I was fully behind Messi at the beginning of this competition. I've always loved him growing up and watching him play. So I'm really hoping that Argentina get through. I think if Messi's able to produce something similar that he has done in the previous rounds, I think Argentina will go through. They've both, you're right, Raf, the both of them have started at different times. For me, I think Argentina are probably starting to get into a bit of a groove. They're starting to play with a bit more confidence. They're starting to look a bit more solid at the back. And maybe there's just a feeling that, okay, maybe it is meant to be that they go deeper into this competition, and the Dutch haven't exactly set the world on fire. Much I think will depend on who scores the first goal. I think if the Argentinians get the first goal and the Dutch have to kind of come out of their shell and out of their shape, I think they'll leave gaps and they'll leave spaces that the Argentinians can expose. But if it's the other way around and the Dutch score first, Nathan Ake, Virgil van Dijk and Timber, when they've sat in, they've looked a hard kind of back three to break down. So I'm kind of sitting on the fence there. I'm just hoping Argentina do it, and I hope Messi gets to go on to a semi-final and play potentially against Brazil.
Yeah, and I guess that particular fixture, Argentina versus Netherlands, has been a lot of classic games in that matchup, Peter, and none more so than the first World Cup I remember watching, the 1998 World Cup, and that Dennis Bergkamp goal. But I always think the Dutch commentary is probably even arguably better than the goal itself.
Yeah, what was the show with Badil and Skinner? They did a good version of taking the mick out of that goal and that whole commentary. But yeah, that's exactly it. I think I annoyed Dara on the podcast recently by saying that my first World Cup that I properly remember is 98. And that game, it's just like fantastic memories. You know, the other thing to bear in mind is we have to go to Amsterdam next November, and they come to Dublin in September as well. So I wouldn't mind seeing the Netherlands win. I have a bit like Croatia, I've always had a soft spot for them because of that World Cup. But yeah, if they did well in this tournament and got confident and realized they were good, that wouldn't stand us in good stead for 2023. But as Paul says, I mean, Argentina is a good story. I would really look forward to an Argentina-Brazil semi-final, because I just think that would be fantastic to watch. That's what you really want in World Cup matches, a bit like England and France, which I know we're going to talk about a little later on. So yeah, and like, look, I suppose some of the great games obviously in the 70s, long before any of our times, but you know, and the Netherlands winning well, and then 4 years later Argentina coming back and beating them well and going on to win the World Cup. So yeah, there's great memories in those games, but certainly 98 was the one that stands out for me.
Yeah, certainly. And you mentioned England and France. A lot of this is the focus, Paul, has been on Mbappe versus not the quickest English defence, Kyle Walker side.
Yeah, like people are saying that Kyle Walker is the perfect right back to deal with Mbappe, and he's got the perfect game to maybe nullify that threat. I think that is true if Kyle Walker is fit and he's come into the competition, you know, with no niggles or no issues. That was his first 90 minutes the other night since October the 2nd. And that would be a big concern for me. And I thought Sarr gave him a difficult time, Raf, at different times within that game against Senegal. And that would be a slight worry for me. I thought they got down that side a couple of times. They could have really punished England if they were a bit more clinical. So I think that Southgate will go to a back five for that reason. I think he'll play Trippier as a right wing back, and he'll put Walker in on that side as well to almost double up on Mbappe and try at times to maybe kill off some of the space that he's been shown to be so lethal in when he finds room and he's been able to create or score goals or tee up Giroud, whoever that might be. So I think it makes sense for England to go to a back five simply because the French have been so good going forward. And I think if they are to remain with the formation that they've played with, I think that's a very risky move, because I think the French, if you give them space, Dembele, Giroud, Griezmann, Mbappe, they're just so good going forward, and they'll do what Senegal failed to do in the first half, and they'll score and they'll put the game to bed, I think. So if they go with a back five, I think it gives them a bit of a better chance, but I just think the French have too much quality. I'm not yet convinced that England could go beyond kind of that tier one team. They've failed to do so in previous competitions, and I think they'll fail again against France on Saturday.
Yeah, and if they were to achieve that, Peter, I mean, you look at the sides of the draw, obviously, as we said, the chances of a Brazil-Argentina semi-final on the other side, there's a reasonable chance of it. Obviously, the Dutch as well will have, especially Louis van Gaal has been talking them up, will also be viewing that with intent. But England, or the winner of that England-France, will obviously get the winner of Portugal-Morocco. And while Portugal have shown themselves to be brilliant tonight against Switzerland, I'd imagine the English would fancy themselves, especially if they got over France, because that would be a massive hurdle. They're going to be slight underdogs in that game.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, it's sort of weird to be talking about a side that have got to the Euros semi-finals and the Euros finals in the World Cup semi-final the last time, and we're kind of talking them down. But Paul's right. You look at the teams they've beaten. Tunisia and Panama. They beat Colombia on penalties, beat Sweden, and then lost to Croatia. Then in the Euros, they get revenge on Croatia. Okay, they beat Germany, which is obviously a big thing for historic reasons and all the rest of it. But like, they drew at Scotland. They beat Ukraine. They got past Denmark after extra time. They're not exactly beating the absolute elite, you would say. And obviously France are defending champions, absolute elite, although they obviously lost in the Euros last 16. But this French team just looks to be in gear. It's a complete step up from what England have been used to, and their form over this entire year has not been good. So even though they've did what they had to do in the games, they obviously beat Senegal, they did well, they won the group. They haven't really been tested by a really elite team, and that's what France are. So the thing is, I like Southgate. I kind of, it's an unfair expectation that's put on him. He's basically brought England from sort of nowhere with excellent players, don't get me wrong, and with a very favourable draw. But he could possibly be in trouble if they don't win that quarterfinal, which is kind of mad, because I think he's earned the right to bring them to the next Euros. But yeah, I just think France is such a big step up. I'm not saying that England can't beat them, but I'm just saying, in tournament play, like, okay, they beat Germany, but it's not the Germany team that it was 8 years ago or anything like that. So it's going to be a proper test for this England team, and I'm just not convinced about them at the back, even depending on which way they set up. I don't know how they're going to keep France under wraps.
Yeah, no, it's going to be their toughest challenge. But if they do hurdle that, then who knows? But before we go, Paul, if you are going to call the two semi-finals that we may see come next week, what's the matchups that you expect once this weekend is over?
Semi-finals.
Yeah, for the semi-finals, who do you expect to be in it?
I'm hoping for an all-South American semi-final with Argentina and Brazil, and then I will go for France to beat England. I think Portugal will be easy winners against Morocco.
Okay, and Peter?
Yeah, boringly, I'm going to echo those sentiments, and I'm going to hope for a Brazil-France final, and maybe Brazil will get their revenge for 98 this time around. They've certainly been the two teams that impressed me most, but I just can't see England. They'd have to pull out like a really sort of generational performance to prove us all wrong, and I'm not convinced that they're going to be able to do it.
Go on then, Raf. What are you going with?
I'm going to go largely the same. I think I would say, if it's the final, I would say Brazil and France. I think they're the two strongest teams in the competition. But obviously, that's not how the World Cup works. What would be interesting, though, if those semi-final lineups do happen, though, some people, I think very optimistic people, would have been billing the World Cup final to be a Messi versus Ronaldo thing. Now, that's very optimistic now that Ronaldo doesn't even start games for Portugal, but the chances are then they would be playing a third and fourth place playoff, which, Paul, I guess, given their status within the game, it's a bit of a diminishing return.
It would. Ronaldo probably play that game as well.
He probably would, and he would probably claim himself as the GOAT if he actually did take a bronze medal in the World Cup. But
it would be a very fitting way for the two of them if it was to be the final. It would be a very fitting way. I know Ronaldo, maybe his likability has diminished over the last couple of weeks and months, but his contribution to the game has been extraordinary, and as has Messi. So it would be an incredible final if it was to pan out that way, and that would probably be the deciding factor for many people on who is the greatest of all time if it was to come down to that. But I mean, a lot of results would have to go in their favour, and they'll probably have to cause a couple of upsets to get that far. So unlikely, but it would be very fitting.
Yeah, and I suppose from a Ronaldo point of view, he'd probably need to start the final though, Peter, wouldn't it, to have that conversation?
Well, yeah, I reckon so. Unless he sort of comes on with 15 minutes to go and, you know, heads to winners or to turn the game around or something like that. But yeah, that's a whole different conversation. I think we have a lot of football to be played before then, and yeah, again, maybe in 10 days or 11 days time, I'll be sitting here saying I got it all wrong, but I can't see that being the final pairing, to be honest. It would be lovely, don't get me wrong, but I still fancy Brazil and France, and that would be my hope. And maybe Brazil to win well and sap all the French confidence ahead of 2023 and their visit to Dublin.
Yeah, well, anyway, we'll see what happens. Probably don't want them too confident coming over here, or maybe we just catch them on the hop when they're at their highest point. But anyway, Paul Corry, thanks for coming on this week, and your UCD counterpart Peter Branigan as well. Thanks for coming on as well.
Cheers, Raf.